All right, well, welcome everybody. We're happy to have you here for another installment of Housing Policy Made Simple. If you're joining us, if you're not a veteran of this, I always like to kind of clue everybody into how we do this. You'll notice there's no PowerPoint up here. There will be no PowerPoint tonight. If you want PowerPoint, you can come to my Advocacy 101 or Homelessness 101 or some of the other things, right? We set these up when we've been doing Advocacy 101 to kind of draw people to the cause for a long time. When I say we, I should first, I'm Tim Shaw. I'm the lead consultant for the Housing Champions Advocacy Network for United End Homelessness, Orange County United Way's initiative. We are also, this is part of a collaborative effort that United Way is a part of, along with People for Housing OC. Elizabeth, you'll hear from her in just a second. She is here with us. And the Kennedy Commission. Cesar, I don't know if he's here yet, but he will be, or we hope that he will be. So Cesar Covarrubias and the Kennedy Commission, and we wouldn't be able to do any of this work if it weren't for the financial support of Barry Ross and Providence St. Joe's. They are 100% in on housing advocacy. They see housing as a key component to the healthcare system here. And so that's why they're so supportive of this. So, and Jamboree Housing Corporation and National Community Renaissance, these are all folks who have funded this effort in the past. So it enables us to do these types of things. So, and then also Rona Henry is here from Welcoming Neighbor Home, one of our wonderful advocates and partners. And so you're going to hear from everybody later, and then we're going to hear from you too. But the reason we set these up is we were doing Advocacy 101, and what we started noticing to just introduce people, to get them in the fold and lock arms and start getting them educated on what the state of affordable and permanent supportive housing was here in Orange County and how they could get involved in producing the housing we need to end homelessness. And we started noticing that people were coming back to that session multiple times because they were just so hungry for additional knowledge. And that wasn't intended for anything, but if you've all been to Advocacy 101 with me, that is me talking at you for 40 minutes and then taking some questions and then we go, right? There's not a whole lot of dialogue, not a whole lot of opportunity to do a deep dive into certain things, but we have to keep educating ourselves, right? Because we work in a dynamic environment as housing advocates. And so there's always laws that are changing, always cities and processes and programs and funding and new developments and all kinds of stuff happening. So we have to keep ourselves up to speed on all of this. And so we started doing what we kind of said, well, we need something like office hours, right? Somewhere where you all could come after you're all involved in all this stuff out there and you're out there advocating and you're going to all of our stuff, and where you could bring questions back and we could go a deeper dive on some topics, some single item topics. So in the past, and we'll probably redo some of the ones that we've done in the past at some point, but we've done everything from doing a deep dive on parking requirements to doing a deep dive. The last one we did was we covered some of the new state housing laws that were just passed and how those might affect us here locally as advocates. And so one thing that we've heard from people that they'd like a little bit more information on is, how do you work effectively with city councils and planning commissions, right? Our local elected and appointed officials. And how do you build good relationships? What's a good way to structure to get them to listen to you? How can we exert, a sense of power and influence while also, setting ourselves up for long-term relationships, with those folks? And how do we even handle things when they're going the opposite direction on us, when we're starting to see our city council being swayed by the Yimby folks and starting to be in opposition to those things? What can we do? So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk about that. And we're all just going to share some from our perspectives, between myself, Rona, Elizabeth, and Cesar. We've been doing this for, I think, 800 years collectively. So I think among all of us, we probably have confronted just about everything a city council or a planning commission, a local agency can throw at you with regard to this stuff. We've seen projects make it right up to the finish line and get pulled and go away. We've seen things pulled out of the fire and we thought that they were going to go one way and they went our way. We've seen everything among all of us. So we're going to share some of those insights with you tonight. Again, it's going to be in a very informal manner. We're going to start where I'm going to share with you a few tips and thoughts that I have, and then we'll go around and get the same from Rona, Elizabeth, and Cesar. But before we do that, I want to, with these things, none of you show up here without expectation, right? Everybody comes to these things wanting something, right? At the end of this, you hope to have something. Well, we'd like to know what that is, because that will help us. We set these up specifically so that we can actually help you solve your issues, right? So we want this, we leave a lot of time at the end to be very interactive, where we can go back in and hey, if you're having a particular issue with your city council, right? How should I approach this? How should I strategize around that? That's what we're here to do. And not just the four of us, but we want you all talking to each other and sharing with each other some ideas. I know some of you are very seasoned advocates, and you've been doing this a long time, so you may have some thoughts. I know some of you are with the League of Women Voters and groups like that that can bring some insight into this. So what I'd like you to do is, in lieu of just having you all go in and introduce yourself in the chat, I'd like you to go in and in the chat, introduce yourself, tell us your name, what city you're from, and what is a question that you have tonight? What was it that you were hoping to get out of tonight that we can, and that'll help guide us as we are sort of answering it. And you can make this a very specific question. Hey, what do I do if, or how can I go about, you can make it like that. Or you can just put it as a general, I hope to learn strategies to da-da-da-da-da, right? So let me give you just a couple of minutes without me talking at you so you can think. So your name, the city you're in right now, and then what you're hoping to get out or what question you might have for tonight or topic you'd like us to discuss. I will say also that if you're uncomfortable putting stuff in chat, we're gonna later on, we'll have time for you to just take yourself off of mute and ask a question too. So, but this will help guide us if you can give us some thoughts in chat. Awesome, good stuff. I love re-energize while waiting for the results of the Rena. Okay, good. I see we have another dog lover. Anna's walking her dog while she's doing this. That's good.
I love Mark's looking for new strategies because old ones don't seem to work.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe Mark, later when we get to Q&A, we'll maybe dive a little deeper into that and have you tell us, what you're dealing with in your city. Well, you're in my city, so I know what we're dealing with here. Awesome, we get a lot of great stuff. All right. Good geographic disbursement of people as well. We got people from North County, South County, Central County, all over the place. And even Ontario, Canada. Love it. Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, thanks everybody for doing that. So we will go back through and look at some of these when we get to Q&A later, and we'll try and knock some of these off. Hopefully as we're discussing and talking here, we'll knock some of these things off. So let's dive right in and let's just talk a little bit about and I'm going to start here. I'm going to do something just because based on some of the comments I saw in the chat. One of the disadvantages that we always have when we're presenting in these forums is we have no idea what your experience level is, right? And I just know from looking at some of you, I know some of you, and I know some of you are very seasoned advocates, right? And so for you, sometimes getting too elementary on things, you're going to roll your eyes and sit back and, oh, I already know this stuff, right? But for some folks who are just joining in, we want to make sure that we kind of get people up to speed. So let me just quickly, for those of you who are a little newer, indulge me, those of you who are experienced a little bit. Let me just kind of tell you in the realm of affordable housing, permanent supportive housing, and housing, the role that city councils and planning commissions play. And I want to talk about both city councils and planning commissions tonight, because I think oftentimes newer advocates ignore planning commissions, which are really important in the approval process for affordable housing in your community. And a lot of the same strategies and tactics will work with planning commissions because their meetings are public, just like city council. They have the same public input requirements, all that kind of stuff. But sometimes there's even a little bit more accessible than your city council members because they don't have to run for office. So they're appointed by their city council member. And so oftentimes that's a better place to start than your city council. So I don't want to ignore planning commission as well. But let's talk about real quickly, a little primer on the roles that each of those play in this. And the way I always think about city councils, the way I think about it is that not just me, but I mean, I believe city councils have the ultimate responsibility for ensuring housing is available for all types of people who live in their city, right? From every income level, different types of housing to accommodate different types of people, people who are struggling with physical disabilities, and run the whole gamut, right? At every level of affordability. And cities are ultimately responsible for planning, for land use planning in their community. That takes the form of zoning, right? So they are the ones who determine what gets built where, what is illegal to build in what parts of their city. So in some cities, you have plots of land that you can't put anything on them but industrial. There are plots of land that you can't build anything but single family homes on, right? Some you can do mixed use, right? So there are a lot of these different zoning designations. City councils are the ones that set those. They are also the ones that can approve overlays, things like that, and can change zoning. So right now, as many of you know, we are in the process of coming out of the housing development process and into a process where cities are having to make the zoning changes that they proposed or said they needed to make in order to meet the regional housing needs assessment numbers in their housing element. And so we have about a year now where we've really got to ratchet up the advocacy effort around those zoning changes, because we're in an 8-year cycle with that housing element. And if we wait 3 years, 4 years to get those zoning changes made, the likelihood that we're going to see a lot of housing produced at the end of 8 years is pretty small. So city councils are responsible for that they are responsible for approving and submitting to the state the housing element, which is part of a city's general plan. And their meetings are public. They are directly elected by people. Some city councils have districts where they are, where only the people who live in a certain district of the city vote for their council member. Some are voted by everybody in the city and they serve on the city council. Some have mayors that are directly elected. Here in Irvine, our mayor is directly elected. Some, the mayor's seat is just a rotating seat among the city council members, and they appoint whoever the mayor is. So it's just kind of important for you to know in your city what the makeup of your city council, how it is elected, how it is structured, all that stuff. So that's really the city councils. Planning commissions, their role is a little bit different in this, and that planning commissions have a responsibility to ensure adequate public input into things like zoning, land use, those types of things. And just like city councils, the important thing to know about planning commissions is they have individual project approval as well. If you do not get your development approved at the planning commission level, you're probably not getting it approved at the city council level, And so it's really important to understand and take advantage of the opportunities at the planning commission level to provide public input, right? So they will often, the planning commission makes recommendations up to the city council. And the way that the planning commission works is each member of a city council appoints a planning commission member. So as an advocate, the thing you need to start thinking, and the way you can start thinking about this is it's likely that they share the same political opinion. Oop, can everybody keep yourself on mute while we're talking, just so we don't get background noise? So you can assume that if a housing positive council member has appointed a planning commissioner, they're most likely going to be housing positive. If you have someone who is kind of housing negative, then most likely their planning commissioner is going to be the same. And so Their meetings are publicly noticed, just like city council. Their agenda is publicly noticed, and they have to set aside time for public comment. So it's really important for you to know who is on your planning commission, all that stuff. So that's just a quick little breakdown. That's the difference between the two. That's how they function. So it's important to know both of them. And then I would say a couple of things that that I know just from my years of doing this kind of work. And I will say also, I actually serve and I just chaired a public body that is under Brown Act requirements, open meeting laws, those types of things. I'm on the Orange County Continuum of Care Board. And I can tell you, I'm an advocate myself, right? But I'm also on the other end of the fence, in that I have advocates basically lobbying me, to vote certain ways at the Orange County Continuum of Care Board. So I have a unique perspective on this because I see some of the mistakes that some advocates make sometimes. And so I want to just give you a few tips, some things that I've discovered that work and some things that you want to try to avoid. The first thing that I would say, and this is going to make me sound really Pollyanna, but I'm just going to say it like this anyway, is I have found that when I assume the best intentions of my council members and my planning commission members, the people I'm advocating with, that I get farther than if I assume worst intentions. And I will tell you, as someone who sits on a public body, that I've been confronted with advocates and activists in both ways myself, where somebody will approach me and I can tell right out of the gate, they are fully expecting me to do the wrong thing, right? They're not really approaching me to educate me or to engage with me or to build a relationship with me or anything like that. So what do? Immediately my defenses go up, right? And I start going, oh, this person may be trying to harm me. And there's that old saw that's really true. People don't fear change, they fear loss, right? And when I'm dealing with city council members, what I'm always trying to make sure I understand in my head is, what is their fear of loss, right? So if they're going a different direction than me, right? Well, why? What is it that they're fearing, right? They're fearing that they're going to lose their seat. They're fearing the community opposition is going to be so intense if they vote the way I want them to vote, right? So that helps me sort of take the emotion out of it a little bit and try to approach it and get them to a place that is where they can cast that courageous vote, where they know they're going to have my support. So I find that I'm better able to enter into that kind of dialogue with my city council members when I assume their best intentions. Now, I'm not Pollyanna, though. If they prove to me that they're not going to act in, in best intentions, then I have to shift tactics. But I've said this over and over again. If you've been to Advocacy 101, you've heard me say this. I've worked with nearly every city council in Orange County at some point over the last 30 plus years. I've met tons of city council members, and I can count on one hand and not use all the fingers the number of them I truly thought were evil people. I could name some names, but I won't, right? There are some of them that are, but most of them want to do the right thing. Some of them are just uneducated, right? And they need to be educated. So we have to take that approach. Some of them just fear the repercussions of doing the right thing, right? So we need to show them the community support. So I think that's an encouragement to approach them with the best intentions. Another really big thing that I will tell you that will cause you to lose credibility as an advocate if you do not pay attention to it. And let me tell you, credibility is one of the only calling cards you have as an advocate, right? Unless you're a big, deep pocket political contributor. Now, I will tell you, here in Irvine, I throw some money around, during election time, because I want to support the candidates that are supporting the things that are important to me, right? So if you do that, you're going to get listened to probably a little bit more. You'll have a little bit more access and entree into that. But that'll only take you so far if you don't have credibility. And the way you'll lose credibility quicker than anything else is to not educate yourself about the body you're advocating to. And again, let me use myself as an example. I'm on the Continuum of Care Board for the county. We have people all the time who come to our meetings or approach me when I was the chair, approach me. I need you to do this. You have to do that. You've got to do this. And I got to take a step back and give them a civics lesson. What you're asking me to do would cause me to have to mount a coup on the city of Anaheim, or because we don't control that. So before you go to advocate, I implore you, brush up on the civics, like really understand who it is and what the power that the group you're advocating to has. That's where you're going to get credibility. If you're going for something and you're trying to eat the elephant with one bite and they're going, hold on a second, we don't control that. That's controlled by the state or the federal government or the county. That's not anything we can do anything about. The other reason it's important is because they might tell you that, and you might believe them if you don't know any different, right? They might tell you that because they don't want to do anything. But if you really educate yourself on what the purview, what the parameters of the authority of that body is, they can't fool you. And you build credibility by never asking them for things that they cannot do, right? And you know how to support and work with them. So that's another one that I really encourage you to do as advocates. And then I really, maybe you guessed by now, I really believe in these, that I'm a big fan of proactive advocacy. And that's really built around relationship building. I want to get to know, I hope to be friends with my city council members. I hope they see me, as a friend and a trusted. Again, I built that credibility, but I'm all about building a relationship. And one thing I really encourage advocates to do is don't be just so tunnel visioned on your issue. Because if you get that way, then you're going to get pigeonholed by the city council member, and they will cut you out of stuff because they know you're going to come at them with that all the time. If you show up for them for other things as well, obviously things that align with your values and that you can support, they're much more apt to support you on the things that you want. If they know they can rely on you for a lot of things. I used to do that all the time, is just ask elected officials, hey, after I'm done talking about my thing, is there anything that's important to you that maybe I can help you with that's not specifically in this area? It would throw them off sometimes because hardly anybody's asking them that. Oh, well, yeah, we're working on this workforce development thing. Do you know anybody in that? I happen to know. I can maybe help you with some of that kind of stuff. So letting them know that you're there to support, that you're not just, I know we're all single-minded. We want our housing built and that kind of thing. But hey, transportation is important too. And cell phone towers are important, and the schools are important, and the sidewalks are important, and the infrastructure is important, and all of these other things that create a livable community, that all impacts housing too. So I really encourage you to be supportive in a more of a broader sense. You're more likely to get their support on your issue if you do that. In other words, show up when it doesn't directly benefit you. Sometimes that'll speak volumes. And then one other thing I will say is don't be rude and say thank you sometimes. I used to show up at city council meetings just for public comments, and I would get up there. I wouldn't even take my 3 minutes. I just get up there to tell them, I am just here because 2 meetings ago, you all did this, and I just want to tell you, thank you so much. And what a great city that you're focusing on those types of things. And let me tell you why that's so important and that's helpful. That's it. I just wanted to come here and say thank you to you. I had so many city council members, at the break, find me and be like, wow, thank you for doing that. We hardly ever have people who show up to do that. Our politics have turned very toxic, and that's really and you all been to the council meetings and school board meetings, things like that. It's getting down to that level where it is really toxic. It's almost like a next door comment section now at the public comments at city council meetings. We can be, I think, the light in that darkness. We don't have to give in to that. And I don't think that's effective either. I go back to what my Nana told me. I just don't feel like there's ever a legitimate reason to be rude to someone else, right? I think we can come and I think we do our cause better when we show up with a little bit of grace and patience and kindness, into the mix. And then the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues, is understand as an advocate. One thing I had to learn the hard way, and there was a West Wing episode that helped drive this home for me. There was a line from West Wing where a guy was complaining about a younger staffer, and he said he thinks decisions are made in the meeting. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting thing. And as an advocate, one thing that I've learned is decisions aren't made in the meetings. Decisions are codified in the meetings. So at a planning commission, and you've heard me say, if you've been to Advocacy 101, I always say, we're not trying to change the NIMBYs minds, the not in my backyard people. We're not, because if I've been working with them for a long time now, I've never changed one of their minds. if we're arguing and yelling with the NIMBY people in public meetings, they've already won, right? That's what they want. They want to create chaos at the 11th hour that's going to derail these things. What we want to do is we want to have the decision already made outside of the meeting, because we did the right policy work to lead up to it. We built the relationships. We were talking offline. We were inviting our city council members to come speak to our group and giving them our input and our dialogue. We were showing up for the housing element working groups and having our input into the housing element and all of that kind of stuff, and coming to things like this and continually educating ourselves so that we can sit in the back of the room when the decision is being made, knowing the decision's made. We got 4 of the 5 council members that are yes votes on that. None of us have to get up there and yell. We don't have to yell at the NIMBYs. We don't have to do any of that kind of drama. So understanding that if you show up right at the end, just like the NIMBYs do, you're just going to be another voice yelling at the council. And that's all they're going to see you as. You want to be the person they look out, the friendly face that has talked to them, that's built a relationship with them where they go, that person's supporting me when I cast this courageous vote. So that's just those are some kind of more high level stuff that I wanted to focus on, some issues that I see sometimes and some things that I've seen work. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. And Elizabeth, I'm going to go to you next. And I'm going to ask you to maybe share some of your thoughts in a similar way about some ways that you worked effectively with city councils. You can go any direction that you want with it.
Hi, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Hansburg, and I run the Yes in My Backyard, or the Yimby group for Orange County. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I have really enjoyed getting to know Tim and Rona and working with them over the last, probably now 1.5 years. It's been a while. It doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like it should have been, but it was. So I was a planning commissioner myself in the city of Fullerton, where I live. So I have sort of seen it from both sides. I've been the person standing at the podium, lobbying the city council or the planning commission to make a decision, you know, in my favor, in the way that I want it to go. But I definitely have been the person being lobbied. And I think the first thing that I'll say is, and this kind of echoes what Tim said, it always pays to be the cool head in the room. People, especially if they are feeling like they have something to lose. I mean, this goes back to what Tim said about people fearing the loss, right? What's going to change for them? And unfortunately, too often, the thing that comes out of their mouth is my property values, right? That this is going to decrease my property values. That there is a camp of folks who think that government exists to maintain their property values. And that is not the purpose of government. And if you do some research, you'll see that that is not the purpose of government. But so just being the cool head in the room, not, definitely not yelling and saying, like what Tim said, don't be rude. But the thing that I will say, and I think this is something you can do during an individual meeting, or like if you're meeting with your council member as a small group, or if you're making public comment, right? Like when you're standing up giving your 3 minutes, is people are hardwired to listen to a story. So you want to have a personal story, and you want to tie that story to a value that you think this commissioner has. Our organization has a set of PowerPoint slides, which is about giving public comment. But I really think that it's useful, even for like individual meetings, which is you want to talk about a specific person and like their obstacle to housing. And ideally, it would be you, right? Like your own housing story. But if you don't have, your own personal housing story, maybe it's your children or your neighbor or your kid's teacher, anybody that that's struggling with some element of housing, affording the housing that they want, finding housing near their job. And then you want to take the issue that person is facing, and you want to tie it back to a value. So let's just say that we're talking about a service sector worker that maybe you're talking about, your children's babysitter, or the person who cleans your church, right? Or cleans your office. And that person is driving from the Inland Empire, right? Because we haven't built any lower income or affordable housing that would serve a service sector worker. You can tie that value back to, I know that this person who, does whatever, blank job, the barista at my favorite coffee shop, I spoke with them and I know that they're driving from the Inland Empire. And because they're driving from the Inland Empire, they're not spending time with their family. That's time that they're not seeing their children. It's time that they are, having to pay higher gas prices, especially now. You could, if you care about the environment, if that's your issue, you can say we're increasing greenhouse gas emissions by this person having to drive. So tying it to a story, like identifying the issue in terms of a person and then tying that to a value is a good jumping off point for when you meet with your councilman or woman, sorry, could be either council person. There we go. So I would say that advice is and that's a good way to get started. And then ideally you want to link that individual story to the broader challenge that we're facing, right? So you could say, my barista at my favorite coffee shop is really challenged because, they're going to UCI while they're working part-time at a coffee shop in Costa Mesa, but they're driving from the Inland Empire, right? Or they're driving from, some other place far away. And if we had more affordable housing, or if we had more student housing, at UC Irvine, that person would have, more time to work on their studies. They would, not be driving as much. So we would be able to lower greenhouse gas emissions. And then say something to the effect of, when you think about the number of students that are experiencing high housing costs, when you think about the number of people facing, an hour plus commute, right? It really brings home the need for more affordable housing close to jobs, right? So that's kind of the formula that I would give. And I actually, if you're interested, I have a handout. If you email me and I'll send you the handout. That just kind of, we have a list of values of things that, people might care about. So, being able to take care of your family, starting a business, accessing quality healthcare, finding and accepting community, having a stress-free commute, starting a family, buying a home, all, different values that, you can tie that back to. So that would be some advice that I would give. And then the other thing I'll just say is, remember that this person that you're meeting with, like, they're a human being too, right? So they come with all the gifts and flaws that the rest of us have. But I would just say the fact that you have asked for that meeting gives you more credibility than the person standing at the podium, with, being hot-headed, right? The person who asked for the meeting in advance shares their concerns, shares about how they see it affecting their city or the people in their city. And really, like, as Tim said, building that relationship, you automatically get sort of like bumped up a level in terms of the credibility that you have with your council person, because you took the time to build that relationship and recognize, and this might, sometimes people feel a lack of confidence in approaching someone because it's like, oh, they're a council person. I'm not worthy, right? Get rid of those thoughts. Throw those thoughts out the window. You are worthy. These people are represented or appointed to represent, the community and you, and they're not just there to represent the no's, right? They're there to represent the yeses as well. So make sure that you are confident in your, I'm going to say right in the sense of, civic rights or duties, that, you have a right to meet with these folks. These folks signed up. I especially really felt this way, that, if I said I was going to be on the planning commission, I had to be open to hearing from both sides, right? Even though I was very, very pro housing, I needed to be open to hearing from the other side. So anyway, that's some advice from me, but happy to answer questions and I'm going to let Rona go first, but I'm happy to share the document we have that kind of gives you a little worksheet to help you kind of iron out, you know, maybe like a jumping off point for how to start a conversation with your council person or your planning commissioner.
Great, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. So again, Elizabeth will be here to answer questions and as we move through this. And I love the point that you just made about not being afraid. I mean, I probably, that's maybe the number one thing that I talk to people about. But the other thing I always like to point out about advocacy too, is you don't always have to be the person getting up in front of and talking at the public meeting, right? Maybe you're better one-on-one, you know, with people. But as Elizabeth said, if you're feeling like I could never go talk to my mayor or my city, get over that right now. I think I talked to the first mayor I ever met with was when I was 22 years old. I knew nothing, you know, except I, you know, was at serving people in need. I thought we needed something. So I went and I met and the more you do it, you'll figure out there are people just like you, right? They're people who they're neighbors just like you that live in your city, right? I know as you move up the chain, if you're meeting with senators and that kind of thing, it can be very intimidating. This should not be intimidating at all. Granted, the city council meeting can be intimidating, right? They're up on the dais, they're staring down at you. You are at the microphone. You've got like the countdown clock in front of you. You got your 3 minutes. You're trying to get it out. And public speaking is not a, you know, it's one of the number one fears that people have, you know. But again, you can contribute. Maybe you're a good letter writer. Maybe you're a good organizer, right? And planner. Maybe you're just great at hospitality. So you host meetings and make sure everybody's fed and feeling happy. And maybe you're just good at sending stuff around everybody. Everybody's needed in the advocacy, you know, line. So don't feel like you have to be the person out front, but please, you know, don't feel like at all intimidated to meet with your council members. So now I'm going to ask Rona Henry to make some comments and share some insights. Rona it has a great perspective on this too, because I think, Rona, it's safe to say that when you first got into housing advocacy, that you didn't know any of this stuff. You're very accomplished in that, you know, you're formerly with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and that kind of stuff, but you had not been involved in this before, but you were concerned about it. And so I think your perspective from being the beginner that you were to where you are now, and Rona has done an amazing job in galvanizing a group of advocates in South Orange County. And they've had some amazing successes down there and they're building even more. So Rona, why don't you share some of your thoughts with us about this topic?
Well, I'd love to, and I'll just for context of the 800 years of experience that you said we had, I only have about 2.5 years and literally knew nothing about housing advocacy. And I kind of wish I could go back to school and get a degree in urban planning because I just find it quite interesting. And the Kennedy Commission, has taught me so much with housing element work. I started my advocacy learning with Tim Shaw at the Advocacy 101. I've gotten from Yimby, they're right on top of things whenever I have more technical questions, Yimby law and so on. Always get great responses. So that would be my number one piece of advice, is that you are not alone in this. And I often will ask them questions and they're always so kind to support me, and they support me very quickly so that I'm able to do what we need to do. And I guess related to that is sometimes I think because I've had those questions that I can ask these folks, I sometimes feel like I know more about housing element policy than maybe the city council members, because they're not doing it full time. That's not full time for them either. So as you know, have confidence not only in your right, but there's a good chance that you know more than the council members. I'm going to go through a series of little bullet points that I personally have found seems like it works or had good results in the last couple of years. And it's been a journey for me. And I just want to acknowledge Ann Owens, who's in our Welcoming Neighbors Home team. One of the biggest things that I learned from Ann, who had been doing advocacy, I think even longer than me, was that she's just really good at picking up the phone, and she's not afraid to go talk to city council members like after a meeting, and she kind of hangs out after the meetings and schmoozes. So that's a really good way to start to build a relationship with them. And to that end, I remember one of the first planning commission meetings I went to, I was chit-chatting to ask a question of a planning commission, but we started talking more, and we walked out to the car together, and I, said, well, what's your background? Why are you in the commission? And boy, did he open up to me. He seemed to just be delighted to talk about why he was doing that work, and how he felt about the city and what he brought to it. So asking about them personally, I think, has been something that has helped establish a person-to-person connection. I would also, I had learned from Elizabeth. She had talked earlier to me about how you should be positive and so on. And I took that as we try to be positive. And I guess what I would say is, in our approach, we talk about the need for things as opposed to saying, if you don't do this, the state's going to, you're going to get in trouble with the state, or there's going to be bad consequences. We always try to be focused on why there's a need for affordable housing. And I would also say that I have found that some city council members or city councils, they're quite sensitive, and of course they're justifiably very proud of their city. But I one time said, for a city, this city really prides itself on having a planned community. I said, but it seems like they've kind of missed the mark because they don't have enough affordable housing. Oh my God. Well, no, we have a planned community. Our community is just wonderful, and we haven't missed the mark. And I was like, I thought that was really soft. So, if you can find a way to, bestow a compliment, really, I think it goes a long way, and keep it positive. Let's see. The other thing that I would say, the other thing I learned from Ann Owens when she was like reaching out to a city council member who I think was new to the city council, she actually encouraged him to take the Homelessness 101, because he really didn't know much about Homelessness 101. And I don't know that has changed. I recently talked to him, and I couldn't believe what came out of his mouth about what he said. So I'm not sure he's any more empathetic. However, he is willing to talk to us, and so that's the good thing. But I guess that's another thing that I would say, is that we've encountered city council members who really are interested in this issue, but like I said, they don't necessarily know things. And so we've had some ongoing one-on-one calls with a particular city council member. And again, I'm not going to name names, but he wants to do something in his city. And we got on the call with them with Cesar Covarrubias. And we actually, he just wanted a series of meetings where he was just learning about housing elements and laws and what could be done and what were the possibilities. And, it ended up that recently he said, well, I don't know if I'm going to run again, but I want to get something done. And we ended up introducing, with Cesar facilitated an introduction to a affordable housing developer. And so he ended up doing a mark, getting that connected with the staff. So being responsive to their information needs, that same city council member wanted to have some information about what the kind of demographics information was in his city by district member, so they could kind of go to each of his council member colleagues and say, hey, did you know that you have this much % low income in your district? And and if there was any statistics on rent burden or whatever, we were able to provide that information. So another example of that is, for example, we were advocating for inclusionary housing, and then we stuck around after a planning commission meeting, and one of the planning people came up, planning commissioner said, oh yeah, I'm kind of interested in that inclusionary housing. And then we said, well, these other cities have it. We sort of listed it. And then we offered to send him a chart of all the cities, which we got from the Kennedy Commission. Cesar, you're going to get a lot of business. I keep referring people to you, but this is the kind of information where they seem to be interested in what other cities are doing. So when you can provide that, it's good. Let's see. The other thing that we've done is there was a city council member that I thought he did a really good thing in a hearing, and said that affordable housing should be on the list of a development agreement that should be renegotiated. And I did a thank you note afterwards to him, and I invited him out to coffee, and he was willing to meet with us for coffee. we've also talked with other housing city council members. We've invited them for the housing element when we were going to go around touring the sites to see what they look like. We actually invited city council members to come with us, and one of them actually did and gave us some really interesting, good perspective on that. And then this is a little bit hokey, but there's one council member that I've been talking to much more. I wouldn't call him a friend yet. However, I knew that he might be interested in a museum that I was visiting, and they were having a special exhibit. And so I sent him a picture, and I happened to have his mobile. He was nice enough to give me his mobile number, and I actually texted him a picture saying, "Hey, I'm at this museum and thinking about you." So, it's kind of like when you're making a new friend, you just try to find personal ways. So that's kind of the range of ways that I'm just trying to look at my list. Oh, and then the final thing, or last things I would say is, don't be afraid of the one-on-one meetings. We had one city council where we had a series of individual one-on-one meetings with them. And I will say, over the course of the year, because of those one-on-one meetings where we were trying to get them to do something on a particular development, in some cases it was only a 20-minute conversation. It was another case, it was like an hour and a half. A lot of them were an hour. Their tone has changed over the course of a year and a half just by having these one-on-one meetings. In another city, one of our volunteers asked for a one-on-one meeting. It was in her district, and he was willing to meet with us. As it happened, he met with the community development director, but he ended up following up and offering to host a roundtable with churches to talk about affordable housing. Now, the churches haven't been answering the invitations that we've been issuing, but that's another issue. So anyway, and then the last thing I would say is, if there are candidates that you like that you can support, for example, I went out to one that was having a photo shoot, was able to lobby her on the way back from where we were walking. So, doing campaign volunteer work for them, I think, is another nice way to establish a relationship. That's all my tips.
Excellent, Rona. And hey, if the rest of you want to know how to do it, Rona's making it happen down there in South Orange County. So she's a really good person to listen to, and all that stuff. I love what you said about, the thank you note. I put in the chat that nobody does that anymore, right? But think about how good you feel when you get a handwritten thank you note from somebody. I know when I was running nonprofit organizations, we literally sent a handwritten thank you note to every donor every year, whether they gave $5 or $500,000. And sometimes people would send the thank you note back to me with an additional check because they were so grateful that we acknowledged them in that way. I think little things like that, Rona, it really gave you a little bit more of a granular look at what it means to build relationships. That's stuff both Elizabeth and I talked about. This is how you do it. And now there are a lot of people that trust Rona and her group down there in South Orange County. Now, last but not least, going to the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of experience, Cesar Covarrubias, who is with the executive director of the Kennedy Commission, one of our amazing partners. Most of you probably know Cesar. So Cesar, why don't you share with us a little bit? And I'm going to ask you to maybe even, I know you probably have some things you want to share, but maybe skew it a little bit more, because I know a couple things that we haven't touched on is maybe some of the ins and outs in terms of the public comment, at council meetings and that kind of thing, some tips maybe that you have for doing that and those types of things. But go ahead, share some of your insights with us about this.
Great. Well, thank you, Rona, Tim, and Elizabeth, for all the great information that you're putting out there. You covered a lot of what we, I think, want people to walk away with. But let me take a step back. We talked about educating folks. We talked about also your tone and communication, and then also having that personal relationship. I think one of the big advice that I would give to folks is take a step back, look at your community, look at your partners, make sure you have a working group that you're working with, because it's essential that you bounce ideas off people. You practice, maybe you want to practice what you're going to say at the city council, or you're going to share the information around. There's been many a times when we've done campaigns and even with some of the work that we've done with Rona and others, where we share letters, we share comments, just to bounce ideas off each other. And we get more comfortable with that information, right? At some point, and we're able to then communicate that a lot better. And then the advice of having a working group is if it's only one person out there, it's very challenging to really do a lot of work locally. If there's a group, it doesn't have to be 20 people. It could be 5 people. It could be 2 people. As long as we have a consistent methodology to the advocacy, I think it can be very impactful. The other part that I would also say is with that working group, take a step back and do a scan of your city council initially. Understand who's who, what are their priorities? We need to find the champion, because we could do all the advocacy we want there, but if no one listens to us, it's going to be very challenging for us to change things from the outside. So we need to find a champion on that council, on that planning commission, on that housing committee, whatever committee we're trying to address, someone who we are targeting to change. And that relationship starts either identifying them on the dais or building that relationship early on as we continue to do this work. The other part that I think I would also emphasize is that we have to be data driven. We have to have data and information that is relevant to the city. So for that, I would recommend highly that we use their own data, use the city's own data to be able to show a need, to show solutions, and that's the other important factor. We can't just be out there saying, you have a need for affordable housing, create more affordable housing. We have to show that there's a need, that there's activity happening, and that there are policies, but maybe they're not responding to the right challenges. And we have to be able to use the data in this city. 50% of your population falls into the low income category, or your workforce is producing 60% of the jobs for low income families. And we also have to expand that education to make sure that folks understand what affordable housing is. In Orange County, somebody making $30 of the area median income up to let's say 30,000 to 100,000, that's a spectrum of low income in Orange County. And when you tell people that somebody making 90,000, 100,000 is low income, they don't believe you until you show them that information. So that's their sons, their daughters who can't afford to live here because they're starting here. There are teachers, there are service sector workers, everybody who's in our community today. We're not trying to build housing for other people to come in. It's for people who live there today and work here today, trying to get that message across. I would also make sure that in your working groups, you have the dialogue of who are the people you can move and educate, and who are the ones you can't. I think Tim mentioned this a minute earlier, that there's some folks that are not going to change their minds. And you can probably see that by the way they talk about this issue, who supports them, if you want to look at their political contributions in many cases. And also, we have to be aware that other people are doing this work to try to convince elected officials to make a different decision that is probably not going to support our cause, right? So if I'm a market rate developer and I just want to do 100% market rate, I'm gonna work to educate that council member or decision maker on the fact that it needs to be 100% affordable, and 100% market rate, and I shouldn't have any affordable in that development. So again, those are just some quick kind of ideas as to what we should be focused on, using data, the city's own data, to be able to do that. Build relationships with staff, council members, decision makers. Staff has a tremendous amount of ability to also sway electeds in many cases, if we can all get on the same page and be able to understand these needs, right? We also want to ensure that we talk about affordable housing and ending homelessness as a way to save money or even bring more money into the local community, right? We're saving on services, whether it's medical, policing. We're also bringing in additional state tax credits, bonds, housing funding that would not be coming to our community unless we had affordable housing. And it takes that local support to be able to really leverage a lot of these opportunities. Tim, you asked me to talk about something and I'm not recalling what that was.
Well, I think we'll come back to that because I think I want to, it's related to public comment at city council meeting, but I want to jump off something you said that I think, just jogged something in me. You've heard from the four of us now, and one theme that you heard throughout, I hope that you caught, is don't go it alone. Lock arms with people, find people that will support you, where everybody can use their particular skills and talents and influence and contacts and all that stuff. You're going to feel supported if you do that. And you're not going to look like just a lone ranger that's going to be lobbing arrows from outside of the battlefield, right? So definitely that's why we try to support you. Let us know, the city you're in. If you want to continue, we'll connect you with people in those cities. I've got a group in Irvine that we're just getting up and rolling here that's going to start working on some stuff together. And so lock arms with people. Another thing I wanted to mention that I saw a little bit in the chat, a couple of times in the chat. Housing is not a partisan issue. It's not. And the minute you make it partisan, then you are no longer advocating for housing. You're advocating for the Democrats, or you're advocating for the Republicans. And now you're in tribalism. Now you're in the binary that our political system works in, and you've just opened the floodgates for toxicity. And I think we are lucky in that our issue doesn't need to be, there's something to appeal to everybody across the political spectrum when it comes to housing, right? I literally had lunch today with someone who represents a very wealthy business person here in Orange County. And we talked about housing. That's what they wanted to meet about, housing, and what can we do about this, right? And the angle that we took on that was more of the angle related to the workforce can't live here. Businesses can't attract and retain employees, or their employees are spending so much time driving in from Corona or San Bernardino because they can't afford homes here in Orange County, right? So there's something to like in affordable housing for business people. There is something to like in affordable housing because constructing more housing, period, creates jobs. Who doesn't want to create jobs? That's not a Republican or a Democratic issue. So I encourage you as housing advocates, be housing advocates. In your life, if you want to be a Democratic activist or you want to be a Republican activist, you can go do those things, but really try to keep this on a path that is in between all of that partisan bickering. And in California, we become a one-party state. And we're in a weird position here sometimes where housing has become a lightning rod for fights among Democrats, which control the state. So you see more leftist Democrats and more really fighting more centrist Democrats, or people that just have different perspectives around what Elizabeth said earlier, property values and things like that, some people who are concerned about those things. And so if we make it partisan, we're kind of, I think, missing a whole lot. So that's one piece of advice. Elizabeth, did you have something else you wanted to add?
I did. So I agree with Tim. Our organization, People for Housing Orange County, we are a nonpartisan organization. We have endorsed candidates on the left and on the right. I think the one thing that I will say is that if you are already involved in a club, like a Dem club or a Republican club, if you've already sort of like enmeshed yourself in your party, talk to the committee, right? Talk to the local club about the fact that this is important to you. The way that these things work, you get these things called, at least on the Democrat side, you get these things called delegates, right? And the delegates are the ones who kind of raise the issues, right? To elevate the issues. So I'm not encouraging anybody to like go out and get real political, but there are people who have already made relationships in their local Dem club or their local Republican club. And if you already have those relationships, I would use that as an opportunity to let your, the people in your club know that it's important to you. It is another avenue. And a lot of times there are people who, there's a tribe of person who likes the fight, right? There's a type of, I personally do not like party politics. I feel like it brings out the worst in folks. That's my personal opinion. That said, I want everyone to be my ally. So if I need to talk, business, and I need to talk about how, we're wasting government money by paying for people to be on the streets, and we could, save money for, taxpayers by, putting folks in permanent supportive housing, that would, this is a little bit general stereotype, but that would appeal perhaps to a more conservative audience, right? So I will wear and come up with my rationale in a way that's going to appeal to the person that I'm not living with. Sorry, that was really terrible. Person I'm working with or want to be working with. Anyway, I'll just share that.
Great. Cesar?
Yeah, I wanted to add also that this is housing is a fascinating area to work in. We all believe that housing is a basic right, a human right, and at some point it turned out to be a commodity. But what we have to understand is that when we are talking to elected officials and decision makers about housing, they're getting different perspectives. And it's not the fact that it's a basic right or a essential right is not the winning argument with a lot of these folks, because they're seeing it from a regulatory perspective from the city staff. They're also seeing it as a planning issue. They're also seeing it as a development issue with developers. So we have to be aware that they're getting different perspectives on this. We have to humanize it, but at the same time, as we are humanizing it, we have to introduce the solutions and the data that's available within that city to be able to convince them of this perspective, right?
Yeah, sometimes that's referred to as making a fact sandwich, where you can kind of find your way into a relationship with somebody to get them to relate to you, as Elizabeth was saying, with a story, right? Something that might resonate with them. And then the stuff Cesar's talking about, right? You can sandwich in between the facts and figures, and the story I just told you, that's not an isolated thing. We know that in your city, X percentage of people are making below this, and and then ending it with more of a personalized, kind of approach. That's called making a fact sandwich. So that's a really good approach to take. One thing I wanted to mention too, because we talked around this a little bit in terms of sort of practically how to begin talking to your city council members. Maybe you're in a city where you're locking arms with some people, right? And none of you really has that kind of access, doesn't really know the city council directly, doesn't have a personal relationship yet. What I would encourage you to do is get enough people, your neighbors, your friends, the people at your church or your temple, and get a group together, pick somebody's house, on an evening, and, have some finger sandwiches and iced tea, or even, if you want to ply people with alcohol, some wine or whatever, and invite them to come. You're a group of voters in their city. They will do that. And don't make it threatening. Like, we're going to come and grill you on. It's, hey, we want to hear your vision for housing in our city. We want to understand kind of what you're thinking. And we want to know how we can support you in getting the housing built, they will come. And that's a good way to kind of start. If you don't have an in already, if anybody in your group doesn't have an in with a city council member, have somebody from your group reach out and say, hey, I represent a group of 15, residents here, voters here, and we're really concerned about affordable housing. And we'd love to, talk with you about it and hear your thoughts on it. And could you come and speak to our group and have some dialogue with us? So really encourage you to do those types of things if you don't have that in right away. So what I'm going to do now is, in the time we have left, I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to ask if we have any questions or comments. And also for this one, I know we have some folks on the call here who are also seasoned advocates. And is there anything that we missed, right? Are there some tips or advice that you might give in terms of working with city council members, planning commission members? One thing I'll say about planning commissions too, I didn't say earlier that it's a really good idea. One of the reasons you really want to get to know your planning commission and work with them is a lot of times they run for city council. And if you build relationships with them at the planning commission level and they do run for city council, you've got somebody that you've built a long-term relationship with and probably a pretty strong one. So I will say now, you either can go into the chat and put a question in there. You can raise your hand. If you have trouble raising your hand, just take yourself off of mute. Some people have trouble finding where that is, and let me know that you want to speak, and we'll take a few questions and comments.
Hey, Jim, Santa Bob here.
Hey, Santa Bob.
Hey, one little tip that I use frequently for keeping in contact with my city council is I like to attend ribbon cutting. And if somebody wants, I suggest if you don't know any of the city council members, find a ribbon cutting in the district where you live and get to meet your council member.
That's a really good idea. That's a really creative way. I think also, you know, finding events like that, maybe the Chamber of Commerce is, you know, promoting that kind of thing. They show up at those things all the time, you know. And so if you're not inclined to maybe get involved in a political campaign for somebody or, you know, that kind of thing, that's a great idea, is to find those places where they are going to show up, where you may have an opportunity to talk with them and start getting an introduction and building a relationship. That's a great idea, Santa Bob. I saw another hand up. And unfortunately, the only thing I see is Zoom user. I'm assuming that's not your name, Zoom user. If it is, that's an awesome name, but and how fortuitous that you had that name for this age. But you want to introduce yourself and ask your question or make a comment?
I don't, this is Pat Goodman from Huntington Beach, and I noticed one other person on the call from Huntington Beach. And one of the things that has gotten under my skin is the RENA numbers, and to try to back in using economic factors that support the need to build 13,000 units in our city. And I think that some data's out there as far as wait lists on Section 8 housing, how many of those are from Huntington Beach. The workforce issue, I think, is really good to see where people are driving from to work in Huntington Beach. We have a big tourist component of our economy. What else? What other places can we look to support the need for that type of volume of affordable housing in our city? And not just say the state said we had to do it. You know, that goes over really well.
Yeah,
I
I would open that up to others. You have an answer about that?
Yeah, I'll throw out a couple of sources. I just dropped some descriptor in the chat. So two sources. One would be, and again, I love the fact that this is coming from the Business Council. The Orange County Business Council every other year puts out what's called the Community Indicators Report. And in that report, it talks about the types of jobs that are going to be developed. And one of the things, I didn't go this year, they just actually released the report in the last couple of months. I didn't go to that one, but I went to the one prior to that, which was like pre-COVID. And one of the things that they said was that the new jobs that are going to be created in this next generation are jobs that are sort of like middle management, right? They're jobs that don't necessarily require a 4-year degree. So unless you're in the trades, right? Like plumbing, electrical, right? Those are sort of a unique, like those jobs pay well. but they're for young backs. We'll put it that way, right? I don't know that many people that are crawling under houses and fixing plumbing at 65. But a lot of the jobs that are like in the service industry are going to be jobs that don't pay particularly well, right? They're going to be between like $50,000 and maybe $70,000 or $80,000. So that, as we've been talking, you know, and what was in the report that Rona dropped, you know, that is low income. If you are married with, or, you know, if you are in a household unit of 2 working people and 2 children, and your collective income is less than $100,000, that is considered low income. And I have often felt like, you know, is that really true? I mean, when I started doing this work, I wasn't paid. I did it as a volunteer. And at the time, we were living on one income. My husband is a teacher. So again, kind of a profession that is, you know, very much needed and is stable, but doesn't necessarily, you know, pay big bucks. There's no bonuses with being a teacher. And it was surprising to me. I only have one child. I have a daughter. But if we had had another baby, we would have been low income. And I remember thinking to myself, like, how is that possible? Because, you know, we both have educations behind us, and it's really about housing costs. That's really what it's about. So I would say, take a look at the Orange County Business Council Community Indicator Report. I dropped it. I dropped a link in the chat. The other place you can look, that the raw data is coming a lot from the census, and the census is obviously every 10 years, but in between the 10-year census counts, they do this thing called the American Community Survey, and that's where they update the data. And you can actually go to the census website and pull down the data. It's hard and complicated, so I try not to use it. I can use it, but I try to avoid it, just because it is really like, you just get a spreadsheet of data, right? You don't necessarily get a ton of like interpretation. But the other place you can look is SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments. They have a lot of reports that use this data and, you know, kind of help interpret, you know, the data. So those are 2 sources that I would recommend. And SCAG produces I think it's every other year, a report. Actually, and the other place you can look is the Cal State Fullerton Center for Demographic Research. I will look these links up and try to drop them in the chat before we're done. But the Cal State Fullerton Center for Demographic Research, SCAG and their reports, and then the Orange County Business Council, and you might even go, they have all their reports online. You can go back and look at, you know, like, I know they did like a 2018 report. You could look at the last report that came out. How has it changed, right? You can kind of track, you know, different pieces of information, because some of the information is given as aggregate for the whole county, but they do have smaller chunks of data by city. So that's my data speech.
You know, one thing, Cesar, before you go, one thing that I recommend that everybody do as well, that keeps you up to date on some of these sources, because it's hard to know. I mean, Liz has got her finger on the pulse of all this. So one thing I do is I make sure that I sign up for the email newsletters from organizations like Kennedy Commission, like if you're not part of that, like People for Housing, like United on Homelessness, but things like the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing, groups like the Southern California Association of Governments, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, these types of groups. So I set aside time. Everyone In is another good one from LA. Who's the group? The group has a great newsletter, and I'm forgetting them. Elizabeth, help me. They're more recent. No, not Scamp. I mentioned them already. They're it'll come to me probably.
Okay.
I'll hang up. But I encourage you to, you know.
Oh, is it Up for Growth?
Up for Growth. Up for Growth. They're fantastic. So I set aside a little bit of time every Saturday just to go through those. I can accumulate them throughout the week, set aside a little time on Saturdays to go through those newsletters and just kind of see what's going on. It points me to studies, more recent data, things like that. So it's a really good way to stay abreast. Cesar, do you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you. So a lot of those data points are really come comprehensive, and I think the opportunity for us to really look at the housing element, the demographic section has some summaries that are available in most cities and should give you a good perspective. I would also caution folks to realize that data can be skewed either way, right? So sometimes the data is missing. In some cases, we have to look for additional data to make sure that we have a complete picture on that. But in the case of Huntington Beach, I think they did a pretty good job on their data information on there. Additionally, from that, there's a group that we work with called the California Housing Partnership, and we work with them to produce an annual report. I can put it in the chat. It's on our webpage on the front page, which is basically a housing needs report for Orange County. They'll be coming up with a new edition here in May shortly. So those are data sets that they take from the census and other areas, but they put them in a fashion where it's digestible for us and relatable to our work, right? So those are some of the areas that I would also ask people to look at. But I can put that link in the chat in a minute.
Great. What other questions? Who else has a question or wants to share an insight? Don't be shy.
There were some questions, Tim, at the very beginning of the
Yeah,
chat.
so let me, if there's any that you saw, oh, Jerry, you wanted to make a comment?
I'm still very new at it. I've been going to city council meetings and planning commissions for the past 2 years. And I just want to share some of my thoughts when I'm sitting in those meetings when there are advocacy groups there. I think I put some in the chat. Know the staff report. Read the staff report very carefully. I have people, I hear, if I'm just sitting there, I hear people going up there and start going off, like, if they didn't read the staff report, I turn off immediately. Or their national advocacy group, they will come in, for example, in Irvine and they have a general playbook. And then you listen to it as a 35-year resident of Irvine, I go, none of what you say apply to Irvine. Then I turn off. So I think, what everybody said was very important. Know your city, know the staff report. And the reason I got very familiar with the city council and the planning commission is I volunteer on 2020 was great in a way, besides COVID, because of the election. So, I volunteer at the various candidates campaign, and that's how you, get to know them. We are city. So you do phone bank, you do their literature drop, and then, when they have get-togethers, and then that's how you build that relationship. And I think in that way, they're more willing to listen to you or grant you a meeting if you ask for it, because sometimes they will just ignore your request for meetings. That happened to me too. So, and that's all I have to share.
Great, Sherry. Thank you so much. Luis.
Yeah, this question is for Cesar. Cesar, you mentioned a annual report for Orange County on housing, and is it broken down by cities or is it for the county as a whole? And that's one question. Second question: how do we get our hands on those reports?
So I put a link there. It's on our webpage. It's the fourth item down. So go to the main page and go down, scroll down to the fourth item, and it's right there. And it's the Orange County Housing Needs Report. And it is county-wide. It's not citywide. It's not specific to a city, but it's county-wide. It gives us a perspective of the overall housing needs. For the city, we would have to go to their housing element and probably work together to get that information.
The Center
Thank
for
you.
Demographic Research, I just dropped
Thank
it
you.
in the chat. It has a PDF that kind of summarizes. It has some information about housing, but it's also about ethnicity and income and gender. So that's another place that you can look. They have PDFs for every city.
Great. Cherry, I'm assuming your hand is still up from the last time, or did you have another comment that you wanted to make?
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand.
All right, yeah.
Sorry.
I was going through some of the, thankfully, we've covered a lot of stuff that people asked in the chat at the beginning, which is where we want to end up with these things. One thing that someone mentioned, I believe Luke mentioned, about looking for a silver bullet on, what to do about homelessness. And I want to just address that real quick. First, by saying that there's really no such thing. And I hope that as advocates, we understand that advocacy is the long game. And we're not going to be able, there's nothing that can just jettison us right to the solution, right? But what we do know is that housing ends homelessness. So in terms of a silver bullet, the silver bullet to end homelessness is housing and more housing. And I know Elizabeth will be right on board with this, not just very low income housing, but we're because we have a lack of housing, period, it creates pressures on even the lower income levels of housing. So we're behind, period, but we need permanent supportive housing. We need affordable housing at extremely low income, at low income, moderate income levels. So this is what we're doing here and what we're talking about here. That's as close as you're going to get to a silver bullet, right? And I would say right now you have an unprecedented opportunity because we are in this unique space coming out of the housing element development process where cities we need advocates in cities to, I'm going to say, and I don't mean hold feet to the fire in a negative sense, but inject a sense of urgency with our city councils that they have a year. They have about a year. It should be less than that, but they've got about a year to enact the zoning changes they said that they needed to do in their housing elements in order to make progress on their regional housing needs assessment number over the next 8 years. So now's the time to really do this. So there's no silver bullet, but this is the best way to do it. And I think that the bottom line that we know who've been involved in this is there's more money in the system now than there's been ever in my experience, right? Now, that doesn't mean we have all the money that we need, but there's more money in the system now. But it's the politics of it. It's the community opposition. It's the regulatory environment. It's the lack of by right development locally. It's the zoning locally that is the impediment to these things. So the money is out there. The great developers of affordable housing, the Jamboree Housing, the National Community Renaissance, and the Community Development Partners, and the Rochelle Mills, they're out there. They will develop and do beautiful developments and properties, right? We've got to get the political will on board. So there's your silver bullet. That's the closest you can get. If you can get to vote number 3 on a 5-person city council on these policy changes, zoning changes, and on project approvals, then we'll start solving homelessness. Jennifer, did you have a question, comment?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot my camera is blocked, but I've been listening to a couple of podcasts. They're not all Orange County, but I hear some people saying that we have to they have to fight like Airbnb and other, long-term housing that has been taken off the market because they can't build out of this. I assume Orange County that's not relevant, but do you know why that's not relevant, or why are you guys so focused on, or not so focused, sorry, but focused on building?
Well, I'll take this.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
So some cities have, excuse me, some cities have passed a short-term rental ordinance where they, I'll just use my city as an example. There's a number of permits, and I can't remember how many they issued, but basically they were concerned that too much housing was getting taken off the market. So there's X number of permits. Different cities, I think the city of Anaheim outlawed them completely. Now that has more to do with the hotels in town, because if there's if you're going to Disneyland and you want, a place to stay, they would rather you stay in the hotel than in the Airbnb. So that, I think, had Anaheim's decision to ban it completely had more, I believe, to do with hotels than it did with actual concern about taking units off the market. But the reason that we are so focused on building is because we have a housing shortage. So even with, the percentage of units, which is a small percentage of units that have been taken off the market by you know, having a short-term rental business, an Airbnb or VRBO, that's like this, right? And we're
Right.
missing like this.
Yeah.
I mean, the magnitude of the housing shortage, you know, it's like, I'm going to liken it to saying, well, all we need to do is build more ADUs and then we'll solve the housing shortage, right? Completely not true, right? There's nothing about ADUs that says that they're going to be places where, you know, large families can live, or that affordable housing will, that ADUs will necessarily be affordable, right? So an ADU in Newport is not going to be affordable. So I would just say, don't fixate on that because the problem is so much bigger. So yeah, so that's my perspective.
Yeah. So we're at the end of our time, and I want to honor everybody's time. First of all, Cesar, Elizabeth, Rona, you know that you're my heroes, and appreciate all of you a great deal for your ongoing steadfast work in this. And all of you, I appreciate all of you for continuing to show up. I love to see these faces and these names at all of our stuff. You're adding to your knowledge, right? And you're getting more and more engaged and more comfortable doing this. If you've not been to a Advocacy 101 and you want to kind of get a little bit, you know, started at a little bit more of a base, because some of this might have been over your head, please sign up for that. Sign up for the newsletters from Kennedy Commission, from People for Housing, from United End Homelessness. Visit the website there. Contact us if you need anything. And please keep showing up, keep advocating. That's what's going to get us over the finish line, get the housing we need to end homelessness once and for all. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and we'll see you all at the next thing.